Hello everybody, this is Dave Parry from Wellmeadow and you're listening to the SME Growth podcast. Most businesses want to grow and we're here to come up with lots of ideas for getting new leads and converting them to customers. Today's podcast is about buyer personas, and with me here to talk about that is Rich Buckle. Hi Rich.
Hi, how's things?
Yeah, right. I think it's important that we start straight away with one of the biggest problems we have whenever we use the phrase buyer personas. And go on, take it away. What's the problem?
So the main problem that we see is that people confuse the word buyer with a buyer in a business. So when we're talking about buyer personas, we're talking about the person who's going to either use the service or the person that you're trying to influence in a decision-making process, not necessarily, Mick from purchasing and your customers, your supplier or your customer. So
it could be a buyer. It could be the person who uses the service.
Absolutely.
Who obviously doesn't necessarily work in purchasing department.
Yeah. So it's just getting that right. What we found is that we've struggled with people to get that across. So sometimes maybe we change the term to customer persona, but for the purposes of just having a common language here, buyer persona, but we'll just make that clarification that it's not necessarily
not the person signing off
the purchase. Order. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's good to get that out of the way. So let's start with then a few what it is, what it isn't. It's building up to a bit of a definition. So what's the difference between a contact in your CRM, let's say, and a buyer persona?
So a contact would be someone who you've actually got in your CRM. And I'm assuming that people have a CRM, customer relationship management.
Somehow,
so database contact, spreadsheet or something. We can probably do another podcast on why you should have a CRM. So a contact is someone that you've actually got the details. You've got their name, you've got their address, you've got their email, all that type of thing. A buyer persona is a sort of semi-fictionalized representation of your ideal customer. That is sort of based on data that you've maybe collected, maybe a bit of gut feel, maybe a bit of stories, but you're building up a picture that's semi-fictional of your ideal customer.
So rather than it being an actual real person that you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, another question we get asked is the difference between a segment and a buyer persona. And I think this is a bit harder because you could use the word segment or the process of segmentation to achieve broadly the same thing. But segments, first off, are often applied to the company, aren't they, rather than the person. So people talk about certain industry segments and that sort of thing. But even if you did do a person-based segment, you may well talk about geographical, demographic, psychographic, those sorts of age profile type stuff. Whereas a buyer persona, I've always got the impression that it focuses a lot more on how somebody thinks, how they behave, what's their reaction going to be. It's designed to inform you in terms of how to interact.
Yeah, it's a bit more, I suppose, psychological could be one way of describing it, but it's the focus is probably more around, rather than with a segment where you're maybe focusing on a particular industry or a particular type of purchase or demographic. I think maybe a buyer persona maybe expands on that a little bit to think more about what are the goals that you're trying to help someone achieve, what are the challenges they're facing, how are you going to help them move forward with either the goal or overcoming the challenge.
That goals and challenges bit is probably where it differs most from just being a segment then. You're really trying to tap into what are the motivators around where the value proposition hits home. Yeah, okay. So what do we need them for anyway? What's the point of having a buyer persona? What types of use do we put them to, do you think?
I think it's pretty foundational really in terms of any marketing you're going to do. If you're going to have a message or you're trying to put your brand out there, you've got to understand who you're talking to.
Yeah, and in any other walk of life, that would be obvious, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If you're going to start to talk to someone, you know your audience type thing. And yet in marketing, a lot of, not everybody, but a lot of people don't necessarily go through this step first.
Well, I think there's a lot of assumptions built in. A lot of people think that they know their customers, and to some extent, maybe they do. But I suppose anecdotally, one of the things that we've found is that a lot of people do know their customers in terms of, they know who they're relating to with customers, but they don't really maybe step back from it. They can't see the wood for the trees and actually step back and think, well, what are maybe some of the goals here? What are some of the challenges? What are some of these more, how do we refine this? And then what we found with certain clients is that as times change and as buyer relationships change within companies, that you find that maybe some of those buyer personas change and that's not picked up. And so all of a sudden the marketing messages don't resonate maybe the way they did used to.
I think that for some people is a very optimistic interpretation. And okay, there's a range out there, we know that. But I would agree that somewhere within the organization, there are probably people that understand their buyer personas. They don't necessarily always get linked up to the marketing department. Because if they did, you wouldn't have someone on the social media feed talking about what they thought about Strictly Come Dancing last night necessarily. There's no, unless you got a buyer persona that you said all they care about is that.
Yeah.
That's a bit of an oddball one, using it for the wrong purposes.
Yeah.
Or why would you just brag on about, that outboundy stuff, as we call it, the shouty stuff, where you're just talking about your company. In most cases, buyer personas that we come across aren't really interested in the ups and downs and fortunes of your company. They want to know how you can solve their problems, don't they?
Absolutely. How you're going to add value. I mean, there was a story I heard a guy say he'd taken on someone to do a load of social media posts for him. And he just thought that just by posting things on Twitter and LinkedIn that this was going to help him. And he said, look, I've had this guy in for a month. Nothing's working. He's posting all this stuff. So he said, let's go and have a look at it. And he sold like storage space or something for companies. And what this guy was posting was just pictures of tigers and in paddling pools and things. And we were just like, so classic case in point, like, do your buyer personas, do your ideal customers want to see pictures of tigers in paddling pools? Now, my guess is probably not. They probably want to understand how you're going to help them achieve, a central London business that's running out of space. I mean, this is all pre-COVID, so there's probably loads of space now. But it's about working out how you're going to use this information to make your marketing more effective. So how are you going to use it to maybe look at targeting emails? So people come on your website, they fill in a form. Depending on the information they fill in, you could allocate them a certain, or start to build that persona, maybe send them a different type of email, depending on...
you'll have a database of people in your CRM from before anyway. You could have hundreds, if not thousands of people that you want to talk to. How many companies have we come across where they're proud that they do a monthly email? They may or may not call it a newsletter, but the point is it's an email. Everybody gets the same thing. Yeah. Well, there's no attempt there to try and talk to the people that have different needs or interests, is there? Yeah.
Or even, just different types. Exactly. Just how can you make your content relevant, I think. And that's the sort of the ethos maybe of a buyer persona is to say, how do we start to make our content relevant to the people who are consuming it? And not everybody, even in potentially one of your customers, you may have different buyer personas within one customer.
Yeah, of course. We'll go through that in a minute. Absolutely.
So that's the sort of thing where this type of personalization in email, using workflows to maybe start to categorize buyer persona, collecting data to actually build up that picture. And I think as well, it's probably worth pointing out that it's a sort of thing that you don't just want to do once and then leave. It's an evergreen piece of work.
You said earlier they change, but also I think your understanding of different buyer personas changes. When we first ask customers to start thinking about this, they come up with a reasonable, first stab at it. But then when you start thinking about it a bit more and talking to your actual customers and double checking, oh, hang on a minute, which one? Oh, we haven't got one for that, or that's not quite how we said it. That's when you need to be refining it, isn't it?
I think it's probably worth pointing out as well, how many buyer personas should you have?
You're right, yeah. And maybe 2 isn't enough and 20 is too many, but where in between, I suppose it depends. Bearing in mind, every time you come up with a new buyer persona, that's more work for you. You've got to create a new bit of personalization or tailoring of, let's say, that email that we talked about. I mean, another place that we use them is through the automation process. And we did a podcast last week on marketing automation. This could direct what happens in that flow. So as you're writing your automation flowchart, if you like, you could have an if statement that says, if they're this buyer persona, do this, and if they're that buyer persona, do that. So let's say you've got a buyer persona that always reads their emails and always clicks through on stuff. Well, you could send them more stuff. But if you've got someone who gets annoyed easily as a persona type about getting too much, you maybe reduce the frequency. So they'd have different outputs from potentially the same workflow.
Or even asking questions on forms. just being sort of quite brute force about it. Ask people, so what's your role in the company? Are you the owner of the business? Are you on the board? Are you just head of a department or just researching for your boss? That type of thing can all it start to inform, well, you might have a different buyer persona for someone who owns the business because they're going to have different interests, different needs, different goals, different challenges to someone who's doing research for their own sort of edification or education in their job. So it's you can be quite upfront about collecting this data.
And I think on the whole, our experience has shown that as long as you don't overburden with people with too many questions compared to the value of what they're about to get, having filled the form in, then actually they are prepared to put down things like how big is your company, what's your job title, that type of thing.
And I think as well, different social channels as well, isn't it? That's going to be another place.
Absolutely. Different buyer personas inhabit different places, right? Not everybody's on TikTok, not everybody's on LinkedIn, not everybody does social media at all. Not everybody opens their emails. You've got to get it right for that person. Another one that I quite like, and I'll let you talk about this because you've been into it a bit more, and those of you that listen to several of these podcasts know that we use software called HubSpot, and we also like to put the web pages themselves, the websites, on HubSpot. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but one of them is personalization based on the persona. That can be quite powerful.
Yeah, so there's obviously some technical things that have to go on behind the scenes to make this work, but it's about actually not thinking of your website as a sort of static marketing material.
Right, everybody sees the same.
But actually it becomes a dynamic piece of content that changes depending upon who's looking at certain pages or where they are in their buyer journey or where they are, we can talk more about that maybe on a different podcast, but also who their buyer persona is. So we can identify certain people coming on the website based on their buyer personas that we've got in our CRM. And because our CRM is linked through to our website using HubSpot, that we can start to offer up personalized content or maybe just use a smart call to action button to point someone to a different piece of content that they might be more interested in. So it's a way of actually almost making your website become like the 24/7 salesperson or marketing person, simply by thinking about how we use this buyer persona.
It doesn't have to be too Big Brother spooky.
No.
It doesn't have to say, hello, Rich, thanks for coming to our website. It could be as subtle as changing the feature image on a page or the hero image just to relate to their industry, for example, or where they're at the buyer journey. Like you said earlier, we'll come back to that another time.
Or changing what kind of resources you point them to. It's straightforward as that, really.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about defining these buyer personas then, because you can go to tremendous depths about this. How would you start? How do you start to come up with who the different buyer personas are for a business?
I suppose the first place to start is looking through your CRM or your database, spreadsheet, however you're collecting your customers, and just going through and just start to make a list of, well, who's in there?
Well, some of them you'll have in your head, right?
Yeah.
You have to see their name on the list. You'll think, oh, there's that one I saw last week.
And then start to look, you may already have done some segmentation, so you'll know what kind of industries they're in or so. But maybe start thinking through, or a good way of doing it is to start getting the sales team involved, because they're normally the people who are closest to the customers, and sit down and start saying, well, what are the common characteristics that we see, or what are the common problems that they have, or what type of people are they? Are they into sports, or are they not into sports? Are they technologically savvy, or do they not like technology? These sorts of, and start to eke it out. You could workshop that, or it depends on.
Well, we did a workshop with that a couple of months ago, and it was better having more than one salesperson at a time. Actually, I think there were about 10 in the room, and they were all firing off each other and disagreeing and agreeing. And we came up with a pretty robust set, actually. It was quite interesting. But there was disagreement initially in the team, and then we reached consensus. But that was useful to get everybody's different perspective. Does that person really behave like that? Is that representative of a large enough proportion of our customers?
And I think you could probably broaden it out as well, couldn't you, to more than just a sales team? There's other people, anyone who's got contact with customers within the business. So it could be accounts, it could be, all sorts of people in the business that you just want to get as much input as a starting point. As I said before, this is not something that you do once and then never look at again. It's an ever evolving piece of information. Yeah. But we try and maybe split things out into two parts to look at, well, what kind of quantitative data? So what have we got that we can actually measure? And that could be when you're looking at things like data in your CRM, you've got maybe sales information, you've got, other bits of, like, maybe you've got demographics, maybe depending on what you've got, stuff you can measure, start looking at that. Then you've got maybe the more qualitative type of data where it's a bit more anecdotal, war stories, how do we think they think type of sort of information. And then just start making a list of all of those things and start bringing them together into a sort of a body of research and look for those commonalities between certain groups.
Yeah, and I think, that probably brings us on nicely then to how we record that. Now, we come up with something called the buyer persona canvas. Now, for students of this sort of thing, you may recognize this as a bit like the business model canvas, and there's a version of that downloadable from our website as well. You can have a look.
Yep.
But it's trying to get everything on one page, isn't it? And
exactly.
It makes it easy for somebody to just in one glance say, oh, yeah, I know about this person.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good point to say that when you're coming up with a fictional name for this character, there's just this bizarre tradition that we go for something alliterative.
Yeah.
So, we use Marketing Mike, we'll come back to later on, but they try and come up with the same letter for the description and the name. So anyway, we've got this canvas then.
Yeah.
Marketing. What's on the canvas? Why have we done that?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, having something that's a one-pager is often useful as a way of just, you can keep it on your desk, keep it in your bag as you're going around. You can, scribble on it.
Put it on the wall, maybe in the
put it on the wall.
Marketing department.
Everyone could have a copy. I mean, it's a good way actually of trying to collect all the information from people before once you're doing a bit of a brainstorming session around, what kind of information have we got, you could just give this out to everybody on the team, and then they can all fill it in, you bring it all together. So what we're trying to do is just have a bit of a framework to think about the types of things. You've got to have some structure.
Otherwise, it's just a very free-ranging debate.
So we sort of start off really with looking at, what are the goals and the challenges that we are trying to help a buyer persona overcome. So what are they? What is a buyer persona trying to achieve? What kind of goals have they got? And then look at also what kind of challenges are they facing.
And if anybody's looked at the value proposition canvas, which is another one of these standard tools that's out there, you can Google that, and it's a spin-off from the business model canvas. There's a nice way that it tries to marry up what are the things that you might help a buyer or a customer with, and it segments that into three different things. A gain that you can give them, the removal of a pain, or just something that helps them do their job better. Yeah. And then your value proposition, it asks you which bits have you got that relate to each of those things. Are we helping somebody with a gain? Maybe it's something they're not even aware of yet, so it's a surprise. So that way that we define our value proposition in context of their goals and obstacles and what their job is, that link is quite important. They're not two independent pieces of work.
And I think as well, it's going to depend on whether or not your buyer persona is B2B or B2C. True. As well. Yeah. That's going to have an influence as to how you think about this. But that's not to say that you can't put more personal things. If you've got a B2B buyer persona, yes, one of their goals might be to maybe hit a sales target or something. But also within all of that, they may have their own personal goals that they're trying to achieve. So I don't know, learn more about a particular subject, or become a subject matter expert, or get the next promotion or something like that. Now that can be quite a powerful driver in terms of understanding that, because that's probably going to be maybe as equal a motivator for your buyer persona as maybe hitting a sales target.
Yeah, it could be something internal, very definitely related to the company, reducing the cost, selling more, doing the job more efficiently or whatever. But quite often people's emotional level operates a bit more subtly, like you just said. Am I going to enjoy this, for example, or am I going to look better in my?
You're always going to get that kind of blurring of a professional and personal goal at some point.
Does this make me more attractive on the job market?
Absolutely.
We're humans,
and
right?
that's where I think you get that move away from a segment to a buyer persona. A segment would very much more be that kind of maybe a one-dimensional goal, a one-dimensional group. Yeah. Whereas with the persona, you're getting all of this mixture of professional, personal.
On the sort of left of the way we put our canvas, there's all these bits which are more about the background of somebody, aren't they? Which is it's useful to fill in actually. How have they got to this position? Have they got imposter syndrome? Have they been doing it for years and they're experts at it? Are they fresh graduates? Do they need a bit of a helping hand? What sort of demographics are they? Do they tend to be young or old? Always a bit nervous about the male-female thing. I'm not sure if it really changes the marketing messaging too much, nor should it, but be aware of it anyway. And like you say, their interests and hobbies. Something we found is that a lot of business owners have enough of the business owners have an interest in health and fitness, or just keeping themselves in good shape. So I'm not saying that we suddenly start giving links to fitness classes or dietary advice or something, but at least being aware of that, you might slip a reference, a case study that relates to that.
I suppose that maybe a classic case in point is the Roger Martin Fag stuff that we do,
right, yeah.
Economic report. So as a growth agency doing some marketing content, why do we give away or help promote an economics report
from someone else?
Yeah. Well, part of that is because we've identified that our buyer personas are, part of their goals is to grow their businesses, and economic factors can have a huge influence on that.
Yeah, I think it reflects fair enough, and even directly in the marketing, but definitely indirectly, just as you're running your business. If you've got to make decisions on investment and recruitment and pricing, and how to batten down the hatches in tough times, or whether interest rates are going to go up, that's all very relevant, isn't it? So that's a good example of other things people are interested in. But the other part of the background bit is the behaviours. We do a bit of psychometric work with teams to try and get teams to work well together, and it gives us a nice framework for thinking about how do people behave. It's good to think about our buyer personas in that term as well.
Yeah.
Are they strong communicators, very creative and innovative, but less focused on detail and following the rules? Or are they opposite? Are they a great rule follower and they love procedures and checklists and detail and accuracy, and perhaps aren't so strong on communicators? Or there's the other axis as well, isn't it? Are they the get stuff done, count the dead bodies later brigade, very task-focused, project-y people? Or are they much more interested in some of the softer aspects of a business and how people are getting on and the organizational dynamic and making the harmony being more of a higher priority than getting the task done? So just knowing, not that you have to label everybody, but knowing roughly what type of persona are we talking about here.
And those behaviours may tie in as well to are they in a position in the company where they're a decision maker?
True.
Because that's going to influence how you do marketing. So we've helped people develop like presentations to show your boss type of thing.
Yeah, great example.
Which is, help your potential customer or customer help themselves type of thing. You give them the material they need. So that's going to be a very different message to if your buyer persona is a decision maker, and they will exhibit.
If they're a strong communicator and less focused on the detail, then your messaging would be, don't worry about the detail, we can look after that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the system does. Whereas if they are focused on the detail, give them a checklist and, as you say, help them with some of the other bits.
I think one of the other things as well, which is quite important, is how are you actually going to help your buyer persona? What is your role? And this kind of maybe ties in a little bit with something called the hero's journey, which is a common story arc where you have someone who starts off on a journey and they've got a challenge to overcome. They've got to go through some kind of pain or suffering, and along the way they have various characters that come along, normally a Gandalf-esque type character or someone like that, who gives them the sagely wisdom to overcome the challenges, slay the dragon, get the prize at the end or whatever, and become the hero. And as part of the role of marketing is to almost act as that sage or that kind of font of wisdom, as it were, as your customers going through this journey of finding out more about you. How are they going to overcome their challenges? How are they going to achieve their goals? You're offering them advice, insights, materials that add value, rather than just shouting at them. You want to become that trusted source of information that they can rely on. And so actually working out, well, how do we help this buyer persona? So a bit like the previous example of, well, here's a presentation you can give to your boss. Or, if you are the decision maker, it's, well, how can we help you make the decision? How can we give you the confidence to do that? So all of that is work out, how are we actually adding value here?
And what's the message that we'll be giving to
what's
support
the
that?
Yeah.
Why don't we close out with a few thoughts on, let's be honest, what are the buyer personas that we use in our business? There's nothing like a real example, is there? We've got a few. They're all alliterative, following the tradition.
On tradition.
And I think it shows as well the spread. We go through them now, but we know that we are talking to very different types of people with a different role and a different behaviour. So let's rattle through those.
So who have we got? We've got Fast Growth Fred.
Fast Growth Fred, yeah. So that's someone who's probably got some funding. They want to just really push the business for fast growth. They just want leads. I'm not saying they don't care where they come from, but they want someone else to look after that problem for them. Probably like we just described, not too worried about the detail of the how, just measure it by the results.
Yeah.
And they can afford to invest in it of a scale.
And then we've got Marketing Mike.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that person you might perceive to be threatened by the idea of asking for outside help, but actually we found it's the exact opposite. Most marketing mics know about marketing automation as a concept. They know about all this stuff they'd love to be doing, but they haven't got the budget for it. So we shape our messaging to a marketing mic very much about how we can help you alongside you.
Absolutely.
And leverage, through automation, get rid of all that nonsense you're asked to do that's admin-y type of thing. So
that's almost about becoming an extension for them, isn't it? We can add breadth and depth.
Help them do their job, but give them gain as well, and take away pain. You're hitting all three bits on that. That's different then from Sales Steve.
Sales Steve. So Sales Steve is our kind of persona from the sales side of things, that's maybe looking for more leads or more qualified leads, and is approaching things from a much more sales orientated perspective.
They want the output, right?
They want the output. Yeah. So it's almost, I'll probably be careful what I say.
Well, you might give away reveal an identity of someone you're thinking
exactly,
of.
yeah. But
okay, yes.
Which other ones have we got?
Well, the other one I think is a good example of how you've got to keep this refreshed. So the one we added after we started, a later comer, was where we realised we had lots of people who worked in our client companies, but were none of those things. But they're all involved and we need to talk to them.
Yeah.
So we called them team member Tim, because they're on the team where we work, but they're not necessarily making the decisions in marketing or sales or driving the growth, but they're there and we want to make sure they're aware of other stuff we're doing. So we still want to have content that's suitable for them, but we don't have to push particular features and benefits, just asking for support of the other buyer personas. So there you go. There's a few examples for people if they wanted to do it. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for in today's podcast. So you've been listening to the SME Growth podcast, and we've been talking about buyer personas today. Our next podcast will be on the buyer journey, and we talked about that a bit earlier on. So please subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts and tell your business friends. And until next time, good luck with your business.